Lanu Hawker had been flying an obsolete DH-2 pusher, but the supremacy of the Albatross was now challenged by new, faster, and highly maneuverable types like the Sopwith Pup, one of the first British fighters armed with a synchronized machine gun firing through the propeller. Air superiority often depends on the smallest of margins: speed, turning circle and rate of fire, and the ability of an experienced pilot to turn them to maximum advantage. There were many better pilots than Manfred von Richthofen, but there was no more lethal finisher. On the 16th of January 1917, he was awarded the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest decoration for bravery. With it came von Richthofen's first command, Jaster 11. In contrast to the Royal Flying Corps, the Germans concentrated their best fighter pilots in elite units. Serving under von Richthofen in Jaster 11 was his brother Lothar, who would end the war with 60 victories. Their garishly colored aircraft gained the unit the name of the Flying Circus. The Red Baron led from the front in his scarlet-painted Albatross. In a further reorganization of the German air arm in June 1917, von Richthofen took command of 4 Jasters grouped together in a fighter wing, Jagdgeschwader 1, or JG-1. In April 1917, von Richthofen had passed Bölker's tally of 40 kills. Soon he would become a propaganda weapon. Aces like Britain's youthful Captain Albert Ball had become legends, as had France's frail hero Georges Guinemer. These men were portrayed as knights of the air, individuals in a mass war. America's dashing Raoul Lufbery had served with the French Lafayette Squadron before becoming his nation's first ace. But none of them was immortal. Lufbery and Guinemer were shot down, and Albert Ball died after losing control in a dogfight with the Flying Circus. He had just shot down Lothar von Richthofen, but Lothar lived to tell the tale. Only the Red Baron seemed invincible. He had turned air combat into a steely science. He always fought at the head of a group, carefully selecting his targets. He scorned flashy aerobatics and dispatched his victims at the closest possible range, opening fire only when he was sure of hitting a vital part of the aircraft or the pilot. In a rare flash of humor, he once said of the enemy two-seaters which ventured over German lines, "It is better that the customers come to the shop." Then, on the 6th of July 1917, the unthinkable happened. In a dogfight with 6 FE-2Ds of 20 Squadron, the Red Baron was struck on the head by a stray bullet. Almost blinded and semi-conscious, he brought his Albatross down. He had escaped death by a whisker. But within 3 weeks, von Richthofen had discharged himself from hospital and with his head bandaged was leading his men again. Shortly afterwards, JG-1 converted to the new Fokker triplane, a finely balanced dogfighting machine which von Richthofen claimed could climb like a monkey. Only 320 Fokker triplanes were ordered by the German Air Service, all of them in 1917. The fighter made only a small impact on the overall course of the air war. It handled superbly and had an impressive rate of climb, but was relatively slow and could be outrun by some Allied two-seaters. Its fame rests almost entirely on the fact that from September 1917 to his death, the following April, the all-red Fokker triplane was the mount of Manfred von Richthofen. Flying the triplane, he was to score his last 17 victories. Meanwhile, British air opposition was growing stronger by the week, as increasing numbers of a new generation of fighters arrived at the front. The balance of air power was now swinging back towards the Allies. Outstanding among the new arrivals was the businesslike SE-5A, more than a match for the Red Baron's triplanes. And the Sopwith Camel, whose name derived from the humped shape of the fairing which covered its twin machine guns. By the end of the war, the Camel had shot down 1,300 enemy aircraft. But von Richthofen's score was still mounting. This Sopwith Pup was the second aircraft he downed in his triplane and his 61st victim. Its pilot, Lieutenant E. Bird, poses with the Red Baron, clearly relieved to have survived. However, one man could not change the course of the conflict. In April 1917, the United States had declared war on Germany. 5 months later, the first combat squadrons of the US Air Service began to fly in action alongside their battle-weary French and British allies. The aircraft they flew were provided by the British and French, since the Americans had no aircraft of their own designed for combat service. But their presence at the front gave a tremendous shot in the arm to Allied morale. Time was running out for Germany and the Red Baron. By now, von Richthofen, seen here with the Kaiser, had attained the status of a national icon. But exhaustion was setting in, and a weariness with his own celebrity. He was happier with his dog Moritz than human company. Of all the fighter aces, von Richthofen alone seemed immortal, but he had long since used up his statistical chances of survival. His aloof nature inspired respect, but not the affection accorded to his mentor, Oswald Bölke. When not flying, he worked long hours in an office plastered with the serial numbers of his victims, one of whose engines had been turned into a chandelier. The final chapter in the Red Baron's career began on the 21st of March 1918, as storm troops swept forward to begin the last German offensive on the Western Front. For 3 days, JG-1 was grounded, as the Germans advanced under the cover of low cloud and fog. When it lifted, von Richthofen was back in the air, and soon scoring heavily. On the 20th of April, he brought his total to 80, downing a Sopwith Camel at close range. It was his last victim. The next day brought the fatal patrol over the Somme. Von Richthofen's flight pounced on 2 reconnaissance aircraft. As the dogfight drifted over the British lines, it attracted anti-aircraft fire. This, in turn, caught the attention of a flight of Sopwith Camels, led by Captain A.R. Brown. Von Richthofen immediately latched on to a novice pilot, Lieutenant W.R. May, and chased him down to the deck. They were now over a sector held by Australian troops. In flying so low over the enemy's trenches, von Richthofen was breaking one of his own most important rules: never to expose himself to unnecessary risk. Several Australian machine guns opened fire at the Fokker triplane flashing overhead. As he pursued the desperately weaving Lieutenant May, von Richthofen was exposed to the upward fire of the clusters of Australian machine gun posts directly below. And the pursuer had become the pursued. Von Richthofen, absorbed with finishing off May, was now being chased by Captain Brown, who hit the triplane with a burst of fire before turning away. What happened next remains unclear. What is certain is that the triplane was also taking hits from the ground. Minutes later, it came bumpily to earth in a beet field. Von Richthofen was found dead in his cockpit, his hand still gripping the control column. His Fokker triplane was quickly stripped of its equipment. What better souvenir than the deadly Spandaus of the ace of aces? There was no attempt to assess how many shots had hit the triplane or from what angle. The next day, von Richthofen was buried in the bleak little cemetery near Bertande. No post-mortem had been carried out on his body. A cursory medical examination concluded that the Red Baron had been killed by a single bullet, fired by Captain Brown. A wreath from his enemies bore the inscription, "To our gallant and worthy foe." But the reaction of at least one British ace, Major James McCudden, was less chivalrous. When told of the Red Baron's death, he said, "I hope he fried all the way down." The Australians had the honor of firing the last salute. The fallen hero was a week short of his 26th birthday. In November 1925, the remains of the Red Baron were returned to Germany and reinterred in Berlin's Invaliden Cemetery. Another volley rang out. President Paul von Hindenburg scattered earth on the coffin. Von Richthofen was at rest, but the question remained, who had fired the bullet that killed him? Immediately after the Red Baron's death, 2 Australian machine gunners, named Buey and Evans, were personally congratulated by their commanding general, Sir Henry Rawlins. But the pilots of the newly formed Royal Air Force, which had come into being on the 1st of April 1918, would have none of it. They credited Captain Brown with the kill. There was scant evidence to settle the matter. Von Richthofen's aircraft had been torn apart for souvenirs. Tellingly, witnesses on the ground had testified that von Richthofen had been wounded in the legs and abdomen. There were pools of blood in the bottom of his cockpit. The balance of evidence suggests that he was killed by ground fire rather than Brown's bullet, but the truth will never be known. In those last moments over the Somme Valley, did the Red Baron remember the bitter romance of the dogfight, evoked by the British pilot Cecil Lewis when he wrote, "The way the earth looked, falling, swallowing to stop deafness at altitude, the scream of the wires, the gasps before the dive, the machine gun."